Hey guys, we are back with a new interesting one. It is Labor and Finance Revolution, Benjamin S. Heath. Let me see if I can go down like this, because for some reason the scrolling situation messes up whenever I try to render my video, which is really bothersome. But let's see if we can't do it this way and see if it works. Benjamin S. Heath. Sorry, that's my dog scratching the carpet to get his nice little soft spot. Labor and Finance Revolution by B.S. Heath, together with a biography of the author. 1891. Ill fares the land, to hastening ills a prey, where wealth accumulates and men decay. Princes and lords may flourish or may fade. A breath can make them as a breath has made. But a bold peasantry, their country's pride, when once destroyed, can never be supplied. Published by Miss B.S. Heath, Chicago, Illinois, 1891. So this is shortly after Harvard College Library, received through the Graduate School of Business Administration, 1926. Entered according to the Act of Congress in the year 1891 by Miss B.S. Heath in the Office of the Librarian of Congress at Washington, D.C. It's really interesting. I was watching a video yesterday that was talking about how, the secret societies. There was this guy who became a judge and everything else under the sun in America. His name's James Bonaparte. He was the brother of Napoleon Bonaparte, and he had the biggest library in America with 8,000 volumes, whereas the Library of Congress only had 6,000 volumes. So, it goes to show you that they do keep what they want secret. We'll get into the whole Napoleon stuff here shortly, but biography. Biography of Benjamin S. Heath by Louisa M. Heath. Plato says that life is barren indeed, that heart is dead to all sweet emotions, that can find no room for the spirit of appreciation of others. Amen, bro. Even though Plato is also an agent. The writer of this biography knew Mr. Heath better than any other person could know him. She knew him from her early childhood. She walked by his side 42 years as wife, companion, and consoler, sharing all his burdens, his trials, and his triumphs. The life of a reformer and pioneer in any new field is never an easy one. There are sacrifices and discouragements and discomforts that the world knows little of. He encounters malignant opposition. He wades through floods of adverse criticism. He sees his highest and purest motives misconstrued and perverted to baseness. Even friends often falter. If they do not altogether desert the cause that needs assistance. 2025. No wonder he grows weary and faint at times and feels that he must give up the good work and let the tyrant's reign continue on. Right? But he cannot relax his effort if he would. There is a power behind him that pushes him onward. The power. He has heard in his innermost soul the call to duty, and he cannot falter. His fellow creatures are in bondage. He sees it as they do not see it themselves, and he hears their dumb cry for deliverance, like a child crying in the night. It reminds me of how I feel right now, watching all the people who criticize auditors not understanding the intent behind it. The true reformer has an abiding faith in his cause, and knows that sooner or later it will prevail. He is inspired and sustained by a lofty purpose, and shrinks not back from discouragements nor the taunts of men. He has the courage of his convictions. He sees, though afar, the promised land, and plants his feet firmly on the pathway, ready to do battle with injustice and oppression, regardless of praise or censure. The biography of Benjamin S. Heath deserves to be written by a master hand, and that, I regret to say, I do not possess. It is said, however, that a life of a writer is best seen in his works, which necessarily bear the distinguishing features of his mind and character. On this ground alone, I would be quite willing to rest Mr. Heath's record, were it not for the desire of numerous friends, many of whom he had let out of mental darkness into the light of truth, who have appealed to me to give the public a more detailed and connected history of his daily life and labor. The gratitude and affection of these prompt me to the work. I shall give a brief but faithful history of a busy, eventful life, one whose natural bent was ever in line of progress and reform. Remember, progress and reform, guys. That was the Republicans. I mean, the Democrats, the Republicans, not now Republicans. Anyways, I shall endeavor to sink the wife in the impartial biographer, and my sensitiveness on the point may lead me often, I fear, to understate rather than exaggerate the merits of the man. The limited space allotted, this biographical addendum to an already large book, together with inexperience as a writer, and lack of complete data, make it no easy task to perform, and your forbearance, dear reader, must be my only safeguard against unfriendly criticism. Benjamin S. Heath was born October 6, 1821, Libra, in Chautauqua County near Jamestown, New York. His parents, Josiah Heath and Abigail Smith, were from New Hampshire and were descendants of the early Puritans. His mother is still living at the advanced age of 91. From her I have received much valuable information bearing on her son's early life, and her frequent letters since the decease of Mr. Heath have been a source of inexpressible consolation in my great bereavement. Mr. Heath was bereft of a father care through death when only 6 years old. He was the second of 5 children. Like me. His mother, well, 6 really. 7 really. His mother, being left dependent mostly upon her own efforts to support herself and little family, was prevailed upon, through advice of friends, to allow Benjamin, her eldest son, then nearly 10 years old, to go 20 miles away, near the village of Mayville, to become one of the family of, to him, a complete stranger. This man was represented as a person who would be kind and just to the young lad, who gave promise even then of the future man. But alas, how little we know, often, of the private life and temper of men, who are intelligent enough to see the advantage of putting themselves on their good behavior before the world. Yep, about the private lives. Should I attempt to give a detailed account of the inhumanity of this man towards his young charge, should I recite half the hardships and pains and unmerited punishment endured for 2 years under his wanton and passionate cruelty, it would pass belief. I will not attempt it. Suffice it to say that for the slightest imaginable offense, he was often denied food for a day or more at a time, and was obliged to allay his hunger by eating such scraps of bread and potato as he could find in the garage cast away for the swine. Coming in late from tending the stock in the coldest days of winter, he was sent to bed supperless, nor was he allowed so much as the privilege of warming his hands and feet by the kitchen fire before retiring to his lonely attic bedroom, often for the most trivial boyish play, while performing work on the farm, which only a full-grown man should have been taxed. He was unmercifully flogged with a large cowhide whip, and the scars it left on his body he carried to the grave. Wake up, y'all. Wake up. If you were not an elite rich person, it all happened to all of us. Mr. Heath often spoke of the terrible blackness of this cloud which darkened his early life, and at times seemed to brood over it with emotions of great sadness. He felt that his youthful days had been almost blighted by the brutal treatment received at the hands of one who should have been to him a guardian and a father. At last knowledge of his situation came to his mother, and aided by her brother, Uncle Nat, as he was familiarly called, the lad was rescued and carried away. Had I space to tell the complete story, it would read stranger than fiction. But for this timely interference, he probably would have been ruined for life, or been carried to an early grave. But cruel and inhumane as it was, and terrible as it is to contemplate, may we not be indulged in the thought that this dark cloud even there was a silver lining? May it not be that to this unjust treatment he was largely indebted for his extremely sympathetic tendencies in after years? Was not his great heart thus attuned to vibrate in sympathy with suffering humanity? Such a view vindicates the ways of an overruling providence, and enables us to bow our heads in submission. After his release from bondage and cruelty, Benjamin remained with his mother, who had married again, till his 15th year. He had then went out to battle with the world single-handed and alone. He performed whatever work his hands found to do, and was thus enabled to lay by money sufficient to attend school during the winter term. By close application to study, which often extended into the small hours of the night, he fitted himself for the position of teacher, which calling he followed for several reasons. He spent his evenings and vacations largely in study, history, the poets, the physical sciences being his chief delight. He made copious notes and comments on what he read, and to this practice, which he never abandoned, he owed his power with the pen in later years. But Mr. Heath had no thought of making teaching his life's work. His mind turned to medicine, and after due course of study he graduated at the Cincinnati Eclectic Medical College. At that time, Professor Rhodes Buchanan was the central figure in the college on account of his remarkable discoveries in anthropology, which, though new and startling, provoking much criticism and opposition, have since given him a world-wide reputation as among the advanced thinkers of the age. Mr. Heath was deeply interested in the new discoveries, more especially that branch known as psychometry. Ooh. Many of the students were invited to the professor's room to aid him in experiments. Yikes. And among these, Mr. Heath was one of the most valued assistants. He entered heartily into the study of the new principles, and the effect upon his unfolding mind, together with the veneration in which he held the great discoverer, had, no doubt, much to do in molding his character in after life. Naturally progressive, and quick to perceive the truth and scope of new thought or innovations, he readily grasped the principles promulgated by this master mind. The study of man from a scientific as well as a spiritual point of view was to him a sublime theme, and among his effects are found reams of manuscript elucidating these great problems. He was led by these principles to regard all men as his brothers, and saw in them a broad philosophical basis for the golden rule and the Christian precept to love our neighbors as ourselves. There you go. See, and that's the true Christian precept, to love our neighbors as we love ourselves. Not to love our neighbors as our neighbors would love us. Like, that's retarded. After his graduation, Mr. Heath entered immediately upon the practice of medicine in Fredonia, New York. Here he conceived the idea of a larger work in the line of his profession than the mere treatment of disease. In 1847, there was formed, mainly through his efforts, the Eclectic Medical Institute. It thrived beyond expectation, and the board of directors decided to transplant it where it could have greater facilities for usefulness and growth. They changed the name to that of Central Medical College and sent out notices that their next course of instruction would open at Syracuse, New York, November 15, 1849. 75 bright, promising students made their appearance at this first course. In the new college, the board of directors, of which Mr. Heath was a prominent one, had the courage to introduce a daring innovation via the admission of women to a full course of medical studies. And of the 75 students at the first term, 7 were ladies, who have become more or less distinguished in American history. These were Miss L.N. Fowler of New York City, Miss Gleason of Glenhaven Water Cure, now located at Elmira, Miss Davies of Mount Morris, New York, Miss Taylor of Buffalo, Miss Warren of York, and Miss Adamson of Philadelphia. I just want to stop here and make note that if you read just even a smidgen of documents from, before the BS, you'll see plenty of women being involved in government, in society, in life. I don't know where this whole facade of like women were nothing but pieces of shite came from, but it was after the rewriting of history. Kind of the same way with like the whole slave thing, or like segregation, people hating supposedly other races. Is just, oh, do not listen to anything. Pick up a book and read. This college was the first to swing wide open its doors to women. Miss Blackwell had run the gauntlet at Geneva, New York, and was really the John the Baptist for the women who were to come after her. But the doors of the Geneva College were locked against women when Miss Blackwell went out. I wonder when that was. Mr. Heath had occupied the chair of obstetrics and diseases of women and children in the original school, but was transferred to that of physiology and medical jurisprudence under the new regimen. His success in this department was preeminent, and he was beloved by his class to an extent rarely ever experienced by a college professor. The duties developing upon him were so arduous that at the close of the second term his health gave way and he was obliged to resign his position. We returned to our home in Chautauqua, and after a few weeks of repose and recuperation he resumed the practice of medicine. About this time the Free Soil agitation was at white heat. Mr. Heath threw himself into the anti-slavery movement with all his soul. Old Squire Plum, father of Senator Ralph Plum, Reverend Mr. Burgess, the presiding elder of the district, and the others of more or less note, were his co-workers. It was on the eve of this election that they were determined that their strength should be felt. Documents were distributed broadcast, meetings were held, and when the votes were counted, much to their own surprise and the utter bewilderment of the two old parties, Whig and Democrat, it was found they had elected to its first term in Congress Reuben E. Fenton, who afterward became governor of New York and the United States Senator. In June following the election, we set our faces westward. Mr. Heath longed for broader fields of labor, where he might have room for that restless spirit which was ever goading him on the greater activity. We traveled in our own conveyance, which consisted of a two-seated carriage and a spirited team of handsome bays. We reached the lake at Erie City, where we shipped on board a steamer for Toledo. From thence, by rail, we went to Chicago. This city, which now contains more than 1 million human souls, was then only a large-sized village. What mighty growth and transformation in 40 short years! Oh, trust. Leaving this embryo metropolis of the great Northwest, we set out again in our own conveyance for Janesville, Wisconsin. What a delightful trip we had, lasting 5 days. Hemmed in and reared from childhood as we both had been among the hills and heavy timber of the western New York, these broad acres of undulating prairie, partly under cultivation, were waved in the breeze fields of unripe grain, with here and there large tracts of virgin soil, decked in green and variegated with innumerable wild flowers, presented to our enraptured vision a scene that was simply enchanting, the memory of which never faded from our minds. I just want to stop here real quick and point out the reason why people don't read anymore, because we don't even use these words in an undulating prairie, variegated with innumerable wild flowers, enchanting. Like, are you kidding me? I'm a teacher. I'm a teacher to 5th and 4th graders. They can't even read. They can't write. They do not understand anything. I cannot comprehend where we are in life now. I was floored and flabbergasted when I started teaching. I was just like, what the living F? And the funny thing is, you know, I'm a lover of history, and so I often would bring situations into my classroom. And I mentioned that one of the first Grimm's Tales that I read, an original copy of the Grimm's Tales, yes, I might touch on that sometime in the future, of how I got an original copy. I don't have it. I saw it in my hands. I mean, I read it. But the very first, again, this was literature that children read in like times like this. And the first sentence of the first chapter of one of the Grimm's Tales, when you open up the child's book, was surreptitiously. And I started to laugh. I started to laugh the minute I opened up the book and read the first sentence. I was like, surreptitiously? Bruh. 5th graders, mind you, 11-year-olds cannot read, okay? And I said that. I said, it's so sad that you guys cannot read when children's books of the past would start with words such as surreptitiously. But see, the thing that we fail to realize is that these kids are damn geniuses. They are just like us. Nothing has changed. They're absolutely hungry for information. You give it to them and they love it. I'll tell you right now, every single day I came into that classroom, my children had no interest in any of the curriculum that the school and the state and everybody else had ready for them. They said, Miss Crulin, Miss Crulin, Miss Crulin, please tell us your stories. Please tell us your stories. That's all they ever wanted from me, was for me to tell them stories. I had to keep it real cool, but the thing about that, though, why I even brought that up, was one of my students one time, um, him and his friend were doing something bad, and I caught them, and he was just like, nuh-uh, nuh-uh, and I was just like, bro, I saw you. You know what I mean? Like, and then his friend from across the room was just like, oh, he was being surreptitious. And I literally got floored, and I was like, abso-freaking-lutely, sir. That is amazing, because not only did he use the word correctly, but he also used it in proper context. He didn't say surreptitiously as I introduced it to my class. He said surreptitious. So it was amazing, and I was like, bro. Anyways, sorry. Mr. Heath enjoyed this grand scenery not less than I, but on this particular occasion he was much of the time silent and meditative. It was evident that some change was coming over the spirit of his dreams. From one of these long, pensive moods he looked up, his countenance radiant with the light of inspiration, and said, Louisa, am I going to give up forever the practice of medicine? I don't know what I shall do, but the way will open, and duty will be made clear to my understanding. Our journey at last brought us to Madison, the capital of the States, where we made our home. Mr. Heath turned his attention to business, miscellaneous, it is true, and was eminently successful. It was for the West, and especially the Northwest, a period of daring adventure and speculation. Mr. Heath partook of the prevailing spirit, but kept an eye single to real improvement and the true interest of the people. I just want to stop here and mention this speculation part, because this is how it always starts, right? Like, these are just total random regular people, and they were going to speculate in the Northwest, meaning take land. But they probably didn't know, you know what I'm saying, better. But I think through this whole reading that we're going to be, it will become clear to him. Circumstances favored a change of residence, and in 1856 we moved to Menasha, a thriving town at the foot of Lake Winnebago. This change proved very successful from a business point of view. He purchased and sold thousands of acres of land in Waupaca County and other portions of the state. He located and secured 6,000 acres for Slidell and Mason, previous to the Civil War. Being one of the directors of the Manitowoc Railroad, very interesting, Manitowoc Railroad, he rendered most valuable service in pushing it to completion. His pen was his forte, and he used it to great advantage in pointing out to the public the necessity and importance of such an outlet as the road would afford. In the meantime, he built a large steamboat warehouse, which yielded a revenue of several $1,000s a season. His work was manifold. He employed laborers and assistants, and had general supervisors over all. He took an active part in the municipal affairs of the village, and was justice of the peace 4 or 5 years. Oh, that's funny. He took part in municipal affairs, and he was a justice of the peace, meaning like a judge for 4 or 5 years. No legal background, because this is how it was before the secret society associated bar suppressed us. But all this did not satisfy the yearning of his soul. He saw that the true interests of the masses were not conserved. The people were misled and cajoled by political schemers and unscrupulous demagogues. See, I knew it. An opportunity presenting itself, he purchased the Neenah conservator of Honorable Harrison Reed, who was going to Florida for his wife's health, and who afterward became governor of that state. He gave the paper a new dress, and named it the Menasha Conservator. It gained a good deal of prominence, and though only a quarter sheet, it was a terror to the political corruptionists and all evildoers. I bet. See, guys, look how important free press is. Look how important the flow of information from each other, not the quote-unquote experts, is. Okay? It was a terror to the political corruptionists and all evildoers. It won hosts of friends and, of course, many enemies. He demonstrated his capabilities in the newspaper line, and secured a reputation which served him good purpose at a later period. In 1858, he presented the names of Lincoln and Cameron as his ticket for president and vice president, and kept them at the head of the Conservator till the nomination of Mr. Lincoln was made in the Chicago Convention. Close on the heels of this election came the great struggle, as we all know, between the North and the South. A mighty financial convulsion followed throughout the Northwest, and Mr. Heath and thousands more with him were drawn down into the great maelstrom of bankruptcy. Nearly all our banks and currency were based upon Southern stocks. Slavery? And when war was declared, this money became utterly worthless. Every industry was at a standstill for the want of circulating medium of exchange. Here it is. It had nothing to do with slavery, guys. It had to do with what they were doing in the 7 financial conspiracies. It had to do with them creating banks for the want of circulating medium of exchange. Failures of businessmen and firms occurred on every side. Out of many thousands of dollars worth of property, real and personal, we managed to save but a few hundred from the general wreck. Mr. Heath was equal partner in a large spoke and hub factory and sold out his interest for a mere trifle. Our cozy little home was also sacrificed. All these disasters, following quick and following faster, had their effect upon a constitution never overstrong, and I fell sick, an additional tax on the overburdened brain and heart of Mr. Heath. And able to be a support and strength in this trying hour, I was determined not to be an hindrance. I decided to go to my mother's home in New York State, and Mr. Heath accompanied me, but soon returned to Wisconsin. While in Madison, Mr. Heath was approached by leading officials and citizens of that state, and asked to take charge of a mission which had been projected to provide a fund for the support of the wives and children of soldiers. Just what the plan was, I do not know. Whatever it was, later events in the great struggle upset it. Remember what Emery was saying about how the banksters were paying the soldiers in unreliable, whatever greenbacks. Anyways, but all the same, he was equipped with proper credentials to visit the army. He made directly for the 22nd Wisconsin Regiment, commanded by the brave Colonel Utley of Racine. The regiment was stationed in Kentucky, and when Mr. Heath arrived, he found it on the eve of a conflict with the home troops who had hitherto remained loyal to the Union. The trouble arose from a late act of Congress regarding the colored fugitives. Colonel Utley construed the act in a most literal sense and was determined to enforce the law at any risk. He hailed the arrival of Mr. Heath as something providential, and they held an all-night conference over the threatening situation. It ended in making Mr. Heath bearer of private dispatches from Colonel Utley to President Lincoln. Bro, this guy was a special dispatcher to President Lincoln. Although this is a scrap of unwritten history of that perilous time, it is by no means an unimportant fragment. In the interview with President Lincoln, the latter said, "This is the vexed question of the war, and must be slurred over without a conflict, or all the border states may join hands with their sister states. Such an event," he said, "would greatly prolong the struggle, if it did not end in final defeat." The President called a cabinet meeting, which resulted in sending orders to Colonel Utley to yield the point temporarily, and move quietly out of the state. This command the brave soldier obeyed, but always felt that a great wrong had been done. I'm telling you, man, these secret usurpers have been working so hard through every single genre of our world. Convinced that the mission which had originally taken him to the army in Kentucky was impracticable, at present at least, Mr. Heath tarried a few days in Washington. Meeting Judge Doolittle and Judge Howe, both of whom were United States Senators from Wisconsin, he was asked by them if he would not like to enter the civil service of the government, that they would be glad to secure him a position in appreciation of valuable services rendered in their state as writer and political organizer. Not seeing any immediate work before him of a more public character, Mr. Heath accepted the proposition, and in a few days was appointed to a clerkship in the Auditor's Department of the Treasury. Okay, Mr. Heath accepted a proposition and was appointed to a clerkship in the Auditor's Department of the Treasury. When have you ever heard about an Auditor's Department of the Treasury? Audit the administration, guys. This was joyful news to the writer of this memoir. and she sped, almost literally, on the wings of the morning to join once more her companion. That also goes to show you the pomp and circumstance of a position like that. Ooh, she was like, whoa, my guy's an auditor of the Treasury. We're like government now. This happy turn in our affairs served as a tonic to my shattered nerves, and I soon regained my usual health. Yeah, I bet. Mr. Heath had charge of a certain room or division in the department, with a number of clerks under his superintendence. While doing almost double duty through the day, he never failed to spend a portion of each evening writing up war news for Wisconsin and Chautauqua papers. He sustained very intimate relations with many distinguished representatives in Congress, and was often asked to criticize and even revise speeches that were written out to be delivered in the Senate or House. Those perilous times warned men who held places of trust at the head of the nation to be guarded in speech and action, lest injury be done to the Union cause. God, has that gone out the window? How vividly this great national conflict comes surging back from the long-buried past as I pen these lines. I may be pardoned the mingled feelings of pride and gratitude that I am able to record the fact that though only a clerk in one of the departments, Mr. Heath's counsel and advice was often sought by men who stood next to the power behind the throne. Power behind the throne, guys. I thought we were a democracy. I thought. Who can tell what influences went out from these private councils to help determine the final result? The silent actor may be the real power that turns the scale, and the unwritten history of a great event greater than the written. Yup. Mr. Heath's services in the Treasury Department were every way satisfactory, and he was rewarded to the extreme limit of promotion in his division, which secured to him a salary of $1,600 a year. He, however, regarded this service as auxiliary merely to the higher work of press correspondence, and as counselor to those who trusted his judgment. After 2 years of Washington life, Mr. Heath leased the Reeves Place. Very interesting. Reeves Place. I'll touch on that here shortly. Reeves means authority, attrapment. Anyways. Containing 20 acres of garden and located outside the fortifications about equal distance from Fort Stevens and the Montgomery Blair place, and there we took up our residence. A gardener was employed, and Mr. Heath continued his work in the Treasury Department, going to and from the city morning and evening in his carriage, a distance of 4.5 miles. The place was a lovely summer residence, but alas, for us, the vicissitudes of cruel war turned it to desolation and ruin. On the 10th of July, after a residence of only a few months, we hastily vacated the premise in favor of the rebel General Early, who came suddenly upon the scene with an army of 30,000 men. We fled precipitately in our light mourning apparel to the city, leaving everything behind us. Ever and anon, a shell went whizzing over our heads, and the deep booming of cannon was heard in our rear. As we rode into the city, we met the advance of the 6th Corps. Tired and weary-looking, it seemed a hopeless case if our safety depended upon them. Near the close of the following day, however, they made a gallant charge on the enemy and drove him out and captured many prisoners. Every house in the vicinity, 8 in number, had been destroyed by shot and shell except ours. This had been occupied by General Early, and in turn was occupied several days by our own troops. After the siege was over, we went out to see if anything could be recovered, but nothing of value was left except a few things of mine, which I found unharmed. Between the occupancy of the 2 armies, everything else was destroyed or carried off, fences all burned, and the beautiful grounds and garden trodden into dust, and made a burial place for the dead. You wonder why that's in the Constitution? You can't come take my house and ruin it. It was a desolate sight to behold, and we returned to the city with heavy hearts. Mr. Heath had expended a good deal of money on that place and in the furnishings of the house, and now again the incidents of war had stripped us of all. Mr. Heath had been at his post of duty in the Treasury Department for 2 years without taking a day of rest. This he stood much in need of, for his health was visibly declining. He concluded to ask leave of absence for a month, and it was readily granted. He drew his monthly salary, and after replenishing his wardrobe, he had lost everything except the summer suit in which he made his flight. We left for New York City. At my brother's house in Brooklyn, we met my uncle, Judge Hall, of Titusville, Pennsylvania, who was deeply engrossed in the oil business. It will be remembered that the discovery of petroleum in any considerable quantity was made during the first year of that war. And too many people, it has always been looked upon as a providential event. Whale oil had long since given out as furnishing anything like an adequate supply for illuminating purposes, and burning fluid, manufactured from turpentine, procured chiefly from the Carolinas, had taken its place, as also that of the tallow dip. When the war broke out, the supply of turpentine was suddenly cut off, and the masses in the North, who had very generally adopted its use, were left in darkness. But never a door shuts but another opens, was true here, as it is so often in personal life. From hundreds of wells in Pennsylvania, petroleum was gushing forth from the bowels of the earth in unlimited quantities. How timely, how providential. You think? Judge Hall talked oil, nothing but oil, and succeeded in persuading Mr. Heath to resign his position in Washington and make a venture in the new business. Mr. Heath believed the backbone of the rebellion was broken and that his service in the Treasury Department were no longer urgent. He went to Washington and handed in his resignation, which was accepted reluctantly by Mr. French, his superior officer. He then rushed on to Titusville and was soon knee-deep in the oil business. This statement will be taken literally by those who have ever been much in oil regions, and metaphorically by others. He was fairly successful in his new undertaking, which consisted chiefly in shipping oil and in buying and selling oil territory. Well, see again, he probably didn't know what he was doing. But this work, or any other which excluded intellectual and reformatory labor in behalf of the masses, was apart from his soul and ambition. Yet he felt the necessity of repairing his shattered fortunes and of placing himself and his wife in a position of comparative independence. See, that's messed up. Seek ye first the kingdom of God and his righteousness, and all these things shall be added unto you, was a declaration of Holy Writ which he, like most men, vaguely recognized as truth, but was wanting in that supreme faith which would lead him forth empty-handed, trusting all to Providence. Experience and failure must teach him this great lesson, as it has taught many others in our world's history. This he was soon destined to have. At the end of a year in the oil business, a favorable opening in bituminous coal mining presented itself. He leased unimproved coal property near Wilmarth, Pennsylvania, on the Pennsylvania Railroad, and in less than 5 months' time had it in successful operation. He was doing well, and felt himself secure against further adversity and want. The mining prospects on his lease were far beyond his expectations. What he lacked was capital to push the work. And he was not long in finding men of means, highly endorsed, who would share in the undertaking. A partnership was formed, and the men were assigned to the duty of superintending the work of mining, while he acted as outside man, making contracts for coal, etc. Within a year, his partners, taking advantage of his absence, mortgaged the property to original owners for $20,000 and left for parts unknown, and were never afterwards heard from. Messed up. This was a crushing blow to Mr. Heath, and would have proved fatal to anyone less elastic and determined. It did seem as if there was a fatality following him in all his worldly undertakings. And is it not true with all of us in one way or another? This world is not the home of the soul, the real life, and we must be weaned from it. The logic of life is failure. Our earthly undertakings and ambitions miscarry, or, if achieved, turn to ashes of disappointment. Sooner or later, all will say with Solomon, "Vanity of vanities, all is vanity." No one would know that. No one reads the Bible anymore. No one reads anything anymore. What are you talking about? For 2 long, weary years, Mr. Heath struggled on in the East to get a foothold again, but did not succeed. He returned to Wisconsin, and after a short stay, he left me with his mother, and wandered forth almost aimlessly with a brother of mine, till he reached Kansas City, and thence on he went to the valley of Marias des Cygnes, Kansas. In this lovely valley, famous as the scene of one of the Longfellow's most exquisite legends. All right, Charlie. Lay down already. You got it. You fluffed it. Of the Longfellow's most exquisite legends. He pitched his tent and began to reconnoitre the situation. New life and new ambition took possession of his soul. Why not, he said, gather together people who are flocking westward in search of new homes, and build here a little city? No sooner had the thought taken possession of his mind than he moved forward to the work of execution. he purchased of the Indian heirs, through the agency of Major Mackenzie of Paola, 600 acres of land lying on the line of the Fort Scott Railroad at equal distance between Kansas City and Fort Scott. Here he began the work of laying out town lots and building a village. There were rival towns on either side which had the sympathy and support of the railroad company, and these threw every obstacle in his way that self-interest and jealousy could devise. Notwithstanding all of this, there had grown up within 2 years a population of 1,200 souls. The county seat and railroad eating house had been secured, and 6 churches reared their spires above this little white gem of the valley. The village was named La Seguin, which means the Swan, and no place more lovely ever nestled down upon the fair bosom of prairie land than this. Every house, by stipulation, in the sale of lots, was painted white, and seen from the elevated grounds which surrounded the place, the village presented to the eye a charming vision of purity and beauty. Mr. Heath had superintended the surveying of every lot, was president of the village, and sole agent of the town company, many of whom resided elsewhere. He was an indefatigable worker, and the labor he performed in those 2 years would have satisfied the ambition of many men for a lifetime. He had built 18 business places and offices, besides a cottage for our own residence, and was constantly called upon by citizens for assistance in one way or another. But here, as was so often the case before in his life, he was destined to sow that others might reap, and build that others might inhabit. Mr. Heath's one marked weakness, if it be a weakness, was too great confidence in the integrity and honor of his fellow men. Yup. I would say distinguish which fellow men you're talking about, because scrupulously upright himself in all his dealings, he was inclined to judge others by his own standard of integrity. Yup. All of our problems, right? He often said that he could not and would not harbor suspicions against his fellow men who seemed fair and honest. Bro, that's the problem with Christians. He'd rather be deceived and betrayed 1,000 times than to cultivate and cherish this ignoble spirit in his heart. Yeah, and that's what happens when Christians such as himself allow themselves to be deceived and betrayed 1,000 times over. Because guess what? Becomes cultivated. Not American ideals, I'll tell you that. And so it often happened that he fell a victim to the wiles and treachery of designing men who came to him in the guise of friendship and honesty, or he would suffer losses by rendering assistance to the truly honest without inquiring very closely into their ability to redeem their pledges. In this last great undertaking, his ambition was to build up a beautiful village, and the personal acquisition of wealth, as it had always been with him, was a secondary motive. Thank goodness, that's what should be, that is what we should all strive for. In a new settlement, there are always men whose means are limited. Mr. Heath was at the head of the village affairs, agent of the town company, and took an interest in every settler. Naturally enough, many of these came to him for assistance, a loan, credit in some shape, or endorsement of a paper. Others, with base ingratitude and falsehood, schemed and plotted to rob him of the hard-earned fruits of his labor, and between the two classes he became involved and lost nearly every dollar he had acquired. Mr. Heath felt that his work in La Seguin was finished, and as he had some important business to transact in Washington, we left our home in possession of a tenant and repaired thither. We never went back to dwell in the fairy city his enterprise had created. In the fall of 1871, we left Washington and went to Baltimore for a short stay. Mr. Heath's first call there was on Mr. Hamilton, with whom he had been in correspondence for a considerable length of time. At his office, he was introduced to a Mr. Booth of Virginia, owner of a large bituminous coal lands contiguous to the Connellsville branch of the Baltimore and Ohio Railroad. As Mr. Heath had considerable experience in the coal business, part of which was not altogether pleasant to remember, Mr. Hamilton advised him to strike up a bargain with Mr. Booth, whom he knew to be a man of sterling integrity, and to go into mining again. The result of it all was that he got a 99-year lease of Mr. Booth, and taking in Mr. Welcome White, cousin of mine by marriage, as partner in business, the two men were soon en route for the prospective mines, which lay 18 miles east of Pittsburgh on the Youghiogheny River and on the Connellsville branch of the Baltimore and Ohio Railroad. Before the spring of 1872, the mines were in successful operation. The coal provided to be the best on the river and was used by the railroad company for firing engines in preference to any other. The mine was called the White Heath Coal Works, and the station at our door bore the same name. Every ton of coal mined found ready sale at good figures, and the outlook from a financial point of view was promising beyond the most sanguine expectations. But who can foresee calamities that await us from adverse legislation and great financial revolutions? We can now. The crash and crisis of 1873. Oh, how convenient. 71, 72, 73. 2 years later, 2 years after they incorporated America, or the United States Incorporation, the crash happened. Again, via Napoleon Bonaparte through the Rothschilds. Do you ever think about why they teach you the way that they teach you in schools? Yeah. The crash and crisis of 1873 fell on the nation without warning like a thunderbolt out of a clear sky. Within 3 years, every coal baron on the Monongahela and the Youghiogheny rivers failed, and the White Heath Coal Works went down with the rest. Hundreds of thousands of men throughout the country, whose business and prospects were good, were crushed by the sudden avalanche. Industry and trade were brought almost to a standstill. So great was the distrust and uncertainty that prevailed in the minds of men. You think? Mills, factories, workshops, and mines everywhere were closed, and millions of laborers were thrown out of employment. For the first time in our national history, we heard of the tramp. Boom! Boom, y'all. The tramp. From the Atlantic to the Pacific, and from the lakes to the Gulf, our highways and railroads swarmed with these poor creatures seeking work or begging bread. Thank you, Rothschilds. This is literally what happened. You want to know when and where it happened? Right there. Right there. Disgusting freaks. But it is in no part of the design of this biography to give a history of those calamitous times. Guys, it's also really interesting to think about what's happening now. Like, we are literally verbatim, reflectively repeating what happened when they took over America. So they are doing the same thing to take over America in a different way. But it is no part of the design of this biography to give a history of those calamitous times, though to speak of the principal causes which led to the crisis will be germane to the story of the last, best, and crowning work of Mr. Heath's life. Mr. Heath had for years devoted many leisure hours to the study of monetary science and political economy, and now that he was confronted with a great national problem which involved these principles, he was well prepared to enter upon the solution of the question in an intelligent manner. First, he was convinced that the necessity which forced the greenback dollars and fractional scrips into general use, to the absolute exclusion of all hard money, had demonstrated the utility and practicability of a pure pauper currency based upon the wealth and credit of the nation. Remember, this is what we read. He saw no necessity for returning to a specie basis. Money was nothing but a tool of trade, a medium of exchange, and for 12 years, a period of unexampled prosperity in all kinds of industry and business, we had only a paper currency. It had carried us safely through the perilous period of war and reconstruction. And why should we abandon this friend and savior in times of peace for money that was born of an age of barbarism? Well, because somebody wants to take you over. Somebody wants to make you their slave, legally. Hello? Was not progress in monetary science possible as it was in other systems and institutions of human concern? Right? Mr. Heath and others who had studied and pondered the subject believe it was. But there was another class of men, the Shylock, whose personal interests were opposed to the greenback currency. These were the creditors of the nation, bankers and bondholders. Money was altogether too cheap and abundant for their use, and with the power which great wealth always bestows, they demanded of Congress the contraction of the currency and a return to specie basis. Their voice was heard, and the work of destruction and contraction was begun and carried on to the volume of currency which amounted, in round numbers, at the close of the war, to $2,000 million, was reduced to about 1,000 million. This enormous contraction of national currency precipitated the crisis and caused widespread bankruptcy and ruin throughout the land. See, guys? It's just a whole bunch of Shylocks, magic money men, waving their wand, saying a word, farting out their butt. And it changes? The F out of here. Get the F out of here. But why, some readers may ask, should it have this effect? Only a brief answer can be given. It is a well-known principle, recognized by all political economists, that the volume of money in use balances, in corresponding relative proportions, the commercial value of people's wealth. John Stuart Mill says, let the volume of money in a nation be doubled, and property of all kinds will double in value. Let it be reduced 1/2, and a corresponding shrinkage of values will result therefrom. This rather mysterious law of money was fully illustrated and demonstrated in the fall of prices which followed the contraction of our circulating medium of exchange. Prices fell 1/2, and in many things more than 1/2 over the whole length of the breadth of the country. Such an enormous shrinkage of values, coming almost suddenly, paralyzed and unsettled every kind of business in the nation, and hundreds of thousands, we may say millions, if we include employed laborers, were overwhelmed in ruin. So, when did this happen? Shortly after the war? So some kind of created emergency, crazy thing that they had to get everybody behind, kind of like the pandemic, some crazy bullshit thing that they had to get everyone behind so that they could start changing everything like they did. The creditor class, bankers, bondholders, usurers, Shylock, and mortgages gathered a rich harvest from the universal wreck. It is always for the interest of these class to have money scarce, for the less there is of it, the greater it is purchasing power. And it is equally as much to the advantage of the people, the debtor class, to have money plenty, that they may meet their indebtedness with the proceeds of their labor at high prices. See? See, guys? Debts are paid from the proceeds of labor, or labor products. And as these are what everybody is striving to obtain for use, the money dealer is desirous of making his dollar cover as much of the good things of this world as possible. The banker and bondholder said, we will not continue to pay $2 a bushel for wheat, 50 cents a pound for butter, $50 a month for a coachman, etc. We know a scheme whereby we can get these things at half these prices and not disturb the fixed amount of our income. Let us persuade Congress to destroy half of the currency, and from that day the purchasing power of every dollar will be doubled. We will then be complete masters of the situation. You guys don't even want to get me started with those motherfuckers. All of which has come to pass as they said and determined it should, and the poor blind people have been the losers and sufferers. Oh, how long will they remain in ignorance of their true interests before they rise in their might and remove forever the power, these financial parasites and wreckers, to gather with their tools in the halls of national legislation. Oh, sister, not for never. Never will they grab their balls and educate themselves so that they can do their own duty and obligations of being the government, the civil government. They are the greatest enemies of the Republic. What? The Republic? Wait, I thought we had a democracy. And they work and scheme but for self-aggrandizement at the expense of the masses. Yeah, brah. And it hasn't stopped in hundreds of years. Mr. Heath comprehended clearly the situation, the causes which led to the eventful crisis, and the monstrous character of the crime perpetrated by the money power against the well-being and prosperity of a great people, and he determined to devote the rest of his life to the enlightenment of the masses on questions of finance and labor reform. Yep, how well he maintained this resolution. Let the subsequent history of his life bear witness. He, however, with his partner, continued along in the coal business till 1876, under the embarrassment of constantly declining prices, coal dropping from 7 cents a bushel to 2 cents when they were forced to close out. During these 3 years, Mr. Heath spent every leisure hour in study and writing up the situation. He familiarized himself with every scrap of important history connected with the financial legislation of the country from the beginning of the war up to date, and had, in the meantime, prepared some powerful articles on questions at issue for publication when a favorable opportunity should present itself. These years of preparatory labor bring our history up to the political contest of 1876, when Peter Cooper was nominated as the first presidential candidate on a greenback labor ticket. All right, we'll stop it right there because it's already at 55 minutes. I know nobody likes to watch past an hour usually, so I hope you guys enjoyed. We'll come back, finish it off. I'll be back to do some reaction and analysis videos, and thank you all for your support. I really appreciate it.